Welcome to Withum's 2021-2022 Global Summit. This year, we have a podcast series with Withum's international team members discussing doing business in regions around the world with our HLB member firms, our clients, and our colleagues. Listen in for discussions to hear how they transact business in multiple countries, to learn about changes in their home country environments, as well as about the culture, cuisine, and must-see sites in each region.
Good afternoon to everybody. This is Rajesh Tripathi from Withum, Smith & Brown. I'm a principal and a national tax leader as a part of international tax team. Today's podcast will be primarily focused on the U.S.-Brazil trade relationship under the current, two governments. Now, the question always comes down to any U.S. company that's trying to do business in outside U.S. and specifically Brazil. Why Brazil is an important country for doing business and why is it so important to the US specifically? As everybody's aware that Brazil is the largest economy in the Latin America and the 7th largest in the world. And the US-Brazil trade relationship is extensive. And the country is the growing market for US exports. And total US trade US and Brazil trade has reached close to about $109 billion. As far as the census that we have received, I've looked at, from the U.S. Bureau of Census. And U.S. trade with Brazil is heavily concentrated, specifically in goods such as, goods and services trade, and the key goods that gets exported to Brazil from the U.S. includes chemicals, petroleum, transportation equipment, machinery, and also leading services exports include travel and tourism, and related services and transportation services. So as the two most prominent economies in America and the US and Brazil have long enjoyed a fruitful commercial relationship, this is the time to talk about why US companies should think of going to Brazil. And I have a great team over here that will talk about what is the current landscape of doing business in Brazil. That said, I'm going to have my colleagues introduce themselves who are going to be speaking at the podcast today. So I'm going to hand it over to Calvin. Calvin, over to you.
Thank you for joining the podcast. I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Calvin Young. I'm a manager here at Withum Smith & Brown, and I work very closely with Raj in the international tax group, handling all issues international tax related.
Renato?
My name is Renato Sella. I'm one of the partners for HLB Brazil, and I coordinate all the business development for every area that we have it in the business, advisory, BPS, in all of the other segments that we have it as well. So I hand it over to Marcela.
Hi, my name is Marcela Enisman. I'm a partner here at Tuzini Freire. One of the responsible for our corporate and M&A practice.
So thank you, Calvin, Marcela, and Renato. So I think the first question that I would like to propose is, as everybody's aware, that the U.S. government with the new Biden administration has some proposed tax changes that we are hoping that will pass through in next couple of days or couple of weeks. So that's I will ask a question to Calvin. Calvin, what do you see that the current tax proposal will be, looking at, or what are the changes we should think about, specifically for a U.S. company that's trying to do business outside in Brazil or trying to do business in Brazil?
Yeah, thanks, Raj. So as far as the current U.S. tax proposals, there's a number of proposals coming out from whether it's the Biden administration or Congress, but just to summarize, there's numerous proposals, but it ranges from everything from raising the corporate tax rate to changes within the current tax law under the provisions that were introduced under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017, that even the proposals are aimed at changing those computations, whether it's reducing some of the benefits provided under those rules or even in some cases just entirely overhauling certain systems. And also there's also talk of implementation of a global minimum tax rate, and that's a global issue which the US has signed on to. So as far as now, I guess the message is just stay tuned for changes and updates to those proposals, but there has not been anything concrete as of yet. And just as far as today, there's the Build Back Better Act, which is currently with the House and subject to vote at any time. That could be voted on at any time this week or going forward. So Raj, that's as far as the U.S. federal landscape. That summarizes that. But do you have any other thoughts on any major issues that you see for a foreign company coming into the U.S.?
Hey, Calvin, I think that's a very key, topic that a lot of foreign companies, when they're trying to do business in the U.S., they forget about, is specifically on the indirect taxes. Even though U.S. does not have a VAT tax regulation, but they have indirect taxes and income tax, specifically for the 50 states, because it's not 50 states, but it's 50 countries that have their own rules, regulations, and tax rules that a company, when doing business in the U.S., will have to comply with. Specifically, adding on to the income tax, there is also sales and use tax, which is getting very, very, it's the landscape of the sales and use tax is changing at this point. And specifically, post the Wayfair case, the Supreme Court judgment that came out after the Wayfair case, that if a company doing business in the U.S., even though it does not have a physical presence in a respective state, and they're operating in that state remotely and providing any sales or selling any goods, there could be a requirement for a company to register in that specific state if they cross a certain de minimis threshold. And if they cross the de minimis incomes in that state, they will also have to collect sales and use tax and remit that to the state. That Wayfair case has created the entire landscape of the sales and use tax in the U.S. changed. And more than, I would say, 30 plus states have already adopted the Wayfair ruling and have changed the landscape of the sales and use tax. So any company that is trying to operate in the U.S. should be thinking about looking at the sales and use tax and how to make sure they're compliant. The second thing I would say is the transfer pricing. As you alluded that the global minimum tax is what overall every country is trying to focus on. But transfer pricing has become one of the key issues in the U.S. because if your company is doing business in the U.S., they have to make sure that they have contemporaneous documents and proper transfer pricing set up in the U.S. And the contemporaneous documents have to be in the file because tomorrow, if it gets picked up for an audit, they have the document to produce and defend themselves. So these are two key things, in addition to the federal tax, that the companies will have to think about and make sure they're compliant, they're registering, and they have proper documentation to do business in the U.S. Similar to what when you're going to Brazil, it's a similar thing. And for that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Calvin, who's going to ask some questions of doing business in Brazil to my esteemed panelist from HLB Brazil. Over to you, Calvin.
Thank you, Raj. So those are some good points about foreign businesses coming into the U.S. having to keep in mind that there are state and local tax systems in the U.S. which are very different from other countries around the world. But as far as turning over and just taking a look at doing business in Brazil. So I have Renato and Marcela here. So just starting off with some questions. What do you think? Is it a good time to invest in Brazil now?
Hi, Kelvin. Well, that's a pretty good question. And I'm trying to be positive here. I think it's a good time, despite all the problems related to COVID-19, which definitely impacted the economy, not only in Brazil, but in many other countries. I think Brazil is advancing rapidly with the vaccination of its population. So if you see most of the adult population has been vaccinated already, that means that the service sector, it has been able to resume all the activities, right? So I think there are several positive factors that should be taken into account when companies are thinking about long-term investment in Brazil. One of them that I can say is the exchange rate, right? Right now it's pretty high, so you can, for every dollar you can probably make 560, 570 Brazilian reais, which means that foreign companies, they can exploit the purchasing power of the currency, right? They can buy assets, they can buy operations, and when you look at the M&A transactions from January to October this year, There are over 1,500 operations, right? And when you see the value of the investment, it's $500 billion Brazilian reais. That means there has been an increase considering and comparing to the same period for last year of 118%. You know, and it seems that U.S. is the country that has the most appetite to invest in Brazil. We've registered 229 deals for foreign investors from January to October. So I believe it's a good time to invest in Brazil.
So it seems like the I guess you could call it the market forces make it a attractive investment for a U.S. company to extend their operations and invest into either expanding or investing into Brazil. But as far as in the Latin American region, do you have any thoughts on maybe a comparison on why Brazil is a more beneficial country to invest in over other countries in the LATAM region?
Yeah, obviously it depends a lot on what type of investments, what type of business that the company wants to bring to Brazil. But if you consider that, as Rod said, Brazil is the largest economy in Latin America. You know, it's still a developing country, which is good because there's still a lot to be done, right? There's still a lot of things to be done in Brazil. Geographic location for Brazil, it's very strategic. Brazil has extensive natural resources. It's actually the 6th largest population in the world. So it has a large middle class, a large domestic market, a very stable and solid financial system. They're large companies providing high quality banking system services. You know, we have a very competitive industry in different sectors compared to other countries in Latin America. Agriculture is extremely productive and competitive. Very large part of the Brazilian GDP. Brazil is actually the country that received or that has been receiving most investment in technology in South America, which obviously makes the economy flow. You know, fintech market, it's increasing the offer of products, services for consumers, for businesses. So I think Brazil has a lot of opportunities, and it's a step ahead of other countries in the region.
You also mentioned that there's certain growing sectors in Brazil. Do you see any that have a good opportunity for growth in whether it's the near term and then also in the long term?
Well, if you look at 2021, agribusiness and mining led all the investments in the country, right? It's probably because of the devaluation of the exchange rates, which made our products very competitive. And then when you see the Chinese economy growing, that helps a lot with the sector, right? When you're talking about agriculture and things like that. So the investors for agriculture, they're more dedicated, they're more directed to technology. So that more than doubled in the last decade. Now, if I had to make a bet with you right now, I would probably believe that businesses linked to technology and digital transformation are most attractive as far as long-term perspective. Now, Brazil has been receiving a lot of a very large sum of investment in that area. In the past, we had some entry barriers, such as in the banking sector, and then now that is changing a little bit. So fintech market moves billions of dollars with local companies, which is attracting a lot of investments, right? But also, so I would say technology and digital transformation, but I couldn't leave out telecom and energy generation, right? I see the government trying to seek to improve the business environments so we can expand the offers of products, services, and therefore improving the long-term perspective for the economy. So these are what I would bet my money on.
I see. So it sounds similar. I guess it's very similar to the U.S. market, where the strongest sectors over the past couple of years have been in the technology space, in the think tank space, as you mentioned. But
Correct.
as far as a foreign company coming in to do business in the region, do you see any common challenges that these clients usually run into when entering the Brazilian market?
Yeah, I think there's some challenges that they face. Most about the complexity of Brazil, right? According to the World Bank, Brazil companies, they spend an average of 2,000 hours to comply with tax system and tax rules per year, right? So the World Bank analyzed 190 countries. Brazil falls under the 181st country position, which means you can definitely say that Brazil is one of the most complex countries to do business, which obviously brings a high cost to comply, right? As far as tax goes, just to give you a perspective, 75% of GDP is the size of the tax litigation in Brazil. So it's very important. And if I could, provide a piece of advice for international companies trying to establish their business here in Brazil, I would say that it's very important, extremely important, to have an experienced advisor supporting you in every way in Brazil, because I've seen companies having several problems, even closing their business if they're not fully properly supported. So the challenges they initiate all the way from the beginning, and then Marcela can talk a little more about this, but articles of incorporation, you have to have a local director to act as your representative, and he must be a Brazilian citizen. You must have an attorney in fact to represent your shareholder, also needs to be a Brazilian citizen. There's several registrations you must be doing before you initiate your business here in Brazil. I've seen companies trying to manage their company from afar, right? And which is impossible. You must have a local ERP running in Brazil, so the ERP is connected to all the branches of the government, federal level, municipal level, Ministry of Labor, Central Bank, IRS. You have to submit monthly, quarterly information regarding accounting, tax, payroll. So at the end of the day, the government must receive data for every transaction that you do on a timely manner. And then if you don't do that, interest and penalties will definitely be applied. Our government here is very good in collecting taxes, very intelligent.
I see. That's so it's a lot of I guess very granular data or transaction reporting as far as any business that's entering the region. That's the key fact. But I guess that also segues into my next question, and I guess this question is for Marcela. As far as from the legal and bureaucratic perspective, I know Renato mentioned some items, whether it's the reporting and every transaction within the company and having a local representative. But do you have any legal or bureaucratic challenges that stick out in your mind that a lot of your clients face when entering Brazil?
Well, I would say that Brazil, just like any other country, has a lot of rules, and sometimes people do suffer with our bureaucracy. So I wouldn't say that the rules are the ones that are a problem, but our bureaucracy sometimes can be an issue. So, for instance, when a company is setting up business in Brazil, on top of having the need to have, like Renato mentioned, an attorney in fact, and needing to have an address in Brazil, there's also the need to have some sort of understanding of how things work here, and we do need to have a lot of registrations for companies. So, for instance, if a company wants to, export or import, they're going to need a radar license, which sometimes can be quite a challenge registration to get because of the need to have a certain amount transferred to Brazil, and they need to have certain capability also. So those sort of issues always come up when a company is entering into the Brazilian market. At the same time, I believe, just like Renato was saying, that Brazil is still, one of the biggest markets in the world, and in terms of Latin America is still one of the best countries to come, and not only because we have this huge market, but also because our rules are kind of similar to what you see in developed countries, and we are trying to do better, I would say. So, for instance, we have had a recent change in our corporate laws, and one of the most common types of company in Brazil is a limited liability company. So most of our clients use that type of company when they enter into the Brazilian market. And before, you needed to have two quota holders as partners of this company, and they could have, one quota and 99% of the other quotas, but still you needed to have two companies here in Brazil, which was always a problem for certain clients and require them to have, two power of attorneys, attorneys in fact, etc. And now you don't need that anymore. So you can have a limited liability company with one quota holder. And that was a change that certainly facilitated coming into Brazil for many companies. And there are other things that we're doing now. It's easier to have, digital signature in documents, even, documents, corporate documents. So I guess what I'm trying to say is still sometimes difficult to come to Brazil, but we see that there is a movement in trying to make things easier and better, and hopefully this way we can attract more investors.
I see. So it sounds like for any company contemplating entering the Brazilian market, it's very important to have that advisor, that trusted advisor in Brazil to hold their hand and guide them through the process of to enter the market correctly and to just do things right, be registered in the right places, and have all those requirements met to successfully establish that business in Brazil.
Correct, I agree.
Yes, for sure. I think that's essential. And I have experiences with clients which didn't have the proper advice, which didn't understand the many issues which can arise in Brazil, and had to change everything they've done in the past. So I would say that good advice is essential here.
Yeah, those are very good points on entering the Brazilian market. But as far as cultural differences that you see with your clients coming from another country outside of Brazil, such as like maybe the U.S., for example, have you observed any cultural differences that you would say exist between the U.S. and Brazil for doing business in the country?
Yeah, I think it depends a lot where the executive's going. I think São Paulo, Rio, major business factors in Brazil, they're more globalized cities, so as far as food goes, clothing, religion, it shouldn't be that too different from US. Obviously, the language barrier, it's a culture difference because only 5% of the Brazilian population speaks fluent English. But at the end of the day, as far as culture goes, I think people here are nice. They tend to make friendlies very easy. Food in Brazil is great. Executives that come to Brazil, they should try the feijoada, which is the rice and beans with pork meat. So one of the things that I think executives find it very different from US is, when you're getting your coffee, in US, you probably get like a large cup of coffee, and if you order a coffee in Brazil, you're probably going to get espresso, which is just a little cup of coffee, so which is very strong, obviously. So that's one of the things that draws my attention. But as far as the main cultures different for the executives, I think the way things are done is probably what shocks the most. And what I mean by that, it's when you're talking about, and I can give you an example. If you're talking about payroll, like payroll in US can be very simpler. It's a lot more simpler than understanding the calculations here for Brazil. Here you have the 13th salary, and then everyone gets a 30 days vacation. There's a yearly mandatory raise, which is determined by the trading unions, the labor union, and then every vacation you get a 1/3 of vacation. So you have to provision all this into your monthly accounting books. You have to provision the 13th salary as well. And then you have to pay the sever funds, which is 8%, and then you have the Social Security contribution, which is another 28.8%. If you're letting someone go, you have to wait for the 30 days notice. You have to provide a 30 days notice. Here we have what we call a work booklet, which is the kind of like a little. Now it's digital, but you record every work that you have in your life on that booklet. So things like that kind of shock the executives when they come to Brazil, because it's a lot different from what they're used to in their home country. So I think as far as culture goes, that will probably, it's obviously my opinion here. I think what I've seen from clients, that's what draws the attention when they're talking about culture difference.
I see. So as far as the cultural differences, do you have any thoughts on the political and economic context for in the near term, or even in the long term, if you can make any guesses on that?
See, that's $1 million question for Brazil, because it's very hard to predict. We've seen analysts changing their prediction every couple of weeks, pretty much. So it's a little crazy as far as predicting. But one thing I can say is next year we're going to have election. We're going to choose a new president. We're going to choose all the governors for the 27 states. We're going to choose a new parliament. So it's going to be, in the political context, will be a lot like U.S. It's going to be, there should be polarization. You're going to have the right and the left, and actually nothing in the middle. So there will be two options for you to vote, pretty much. That's what we're expecting as a population. Now, on the negative side, in talking about the economy, I think the fight against inflation will slow the economic activities next year. A lot because of as a result of the monetary policy. So the government, it's increasing interest rates, right? And that it's impacting, obviously, and it will impact even more on the household consumption and private investments. On the fiscal policy side, the government is spending quite a bit more than what was expected. And next year, the extension of social programs will make that even worse, right? So low-income families in Brazil are expected to get a 50% increase on their benefits now. So that'll definitely bring a discomfort for the government expenditure, which is going to bring it's already impacting the long-term interest rates, and it's impacting the exchange rates. So I'm thinking companies, they should expect the same scenario for next year. Now, on the positive side, I think that will be good for export sector. So companies, it's going to benefit from the exchange rate. And if the world consumption increase, that should help quite even more. Nevertheless, the GDP next year should be very low, between 1 to 1.5%, which is lower than 2021. And I think we as a population, we are expecting that the government, the current government and the next government, they should continue, and they should make progress as far as the tax and the administrative reforms. These reforms should be structural changes, and should be able to increase all the resources available as far as money goes for government expenditures and private sector investments. So the country as a whole is relying a lot on these reforms, and we're hoping that the politicians, they can get together and make this happen. So.
No, Renato, thank you so much. I think this is a great insight, specifically on doing business in Brazil, the complexities that you highlighted and Marcela highlighted. I think companies from the US, when they are looking at expanding into Brazil, they should focus on, making sure that they are understanding the tax, regulatory, and the legal landscape, but also the cultural landscape, that you really portrayed a very bright, color of the culture and the warm welcome that people, provide foreign businesses. So that said, I think if any of our listeners who listen to this podcast, if they have any questions or they're planning to go do business in Brazil, they could reach out to any one of our participants, and we can connect them and we can support them on how to expand and explore and set up their operations in Brazil. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure. Thanks, Raj.
Thank you for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed your virtual trip to another region as much as I did. Please join us again as we continue to roam the world.